The British Empire is often remembered as one of the greatest empires in history, famous for its navy, trade, and global influence. But behind this powerful image lies a dark and uncomfortable truth. At its peak, the British Empire controlled nearly 1/4 of the world's population and land, and its influence shaped modern politics, economies, and languages. However, this empire was not built through peace or cooperation. It was built through war, exploitation, violence, and the systematic destruction of cultures. The story most people learn in school focuses on progress, railways, law, and education, but rarely talks about the suffering that made those achievements possible. To truly understand how the British Empire shaped the modern world, we must look at the darker side of its history. The rise of the British Empire began in the late 16th century, when England started exploring beyond Europe. At first, Britain was not the strongest power. Spain and Portugal dominated global exploration, but Britain learned quickly. Through naval expansion, trade companies, and military force, Britain slowly began taking control of distant lands. The idea of empire was simple: take land, extract resources, control trade, and rule the people. Colonies were not created to help local populations, they existed to benefit Britain. Gold, spices, cotton, tea, sugar, and later oil were taken from colonies and sent to Britain, while the people who lived there were left poor and powerless. One of the most brutal foundations of the British Empire was colonization. Colonization was not just about settling land, it was about domination. British forces often arrived in foreign lands, claiming trade or protection, but once they gained power, they imposed their own laws, rulers, and systems. Indigenous leaders were removed or killed, and traditional systems of governance were destroyed. Local cultures, religions, and languages were treated as inferior. British culture was presented as civilized, while native cultures were labeled primitive. This mindset justified extreme violence and exploitation. India is one of the clearest examples of the dark side of British rule. Before British control, India was one of the richest regions in the world, with advanced industries, trade networks, and education systems. The British East India Company arrived as a trading company, but slowly became a ruling power through military force and political manipulation. Indian rulers were defeated, bribed, or replaced. Once Britain gained control, India's economy was reshaped to serve British interests. Local industries were destroyed, especially the textile industry, so that British-made goods could dominate the market. Millions of Indians were forced into poverty as wealth flowed out of the country. British rule in India also led to devastating famines. These famines were not caused by lack of food, but by British policies. Food was exported to Britain, even while Indians were starving. During the Bengal famine of 1943, an estimated 3 million people died, yet British officials continued to prioritize wartime supplies over human lives. Some British leaders even blamed Indians for their own suffering, showing a complete lack of empathy. These famines were not accidents, they were the result of deliberate economic decisions. Africa also suffered greatly under the British Empire. British colonization in Africa involved land theft, forced labor, and racial violence. Africans were forced to work in mines, plantations, and construction projects under harsh conditions. Entire communities were displaced so that land could be used for British settlers or companies. In Kenya, during the Momo uprising, British forces imprisoned, tortured, and killed thousands of people in detention camps. These crimes were hidden for decades and only acknowledged much later. African lives were treated as disposable in the pursuit of profit and control. Another dark chapter of the British Empire is its role in slavery. Britain was deeply involved in the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were captured, transported in brutal conditions, and sold as slaves in the Americas. British ships played a major role in this system, and British cities like Liverpool and Bristol became wealthy because of slave trade profits. Although Britain later abolished slavery and now presents itself as a leader in ending it, this does not erase the fact that slavery helped build the empire's wealth. Even after abolition, former slave owners were financially compensated, while the enslaved people received nothing. Language was also used as a weapon of empire. English was not simply spread naturally, it was often forced. In many colonies, local languages were banned in schools and government. English became the language of power, education, and opportunity. If you wanted a job, respect, or survival, you had to learn English. This created generations of people disconnected from their native languages and cultures. While English today is seen as a global language, its spread is closely tied to colonization and control. The British Empire also used the idea of civilizing missions to justify its actions. British leaders claimed they were bringing education, law, and Christianity to the world. In reality, these systems often erased local knowledge and belief systems. Missionaries destroyed indigenous religions and traditions, replacing them with European values. Education systems taught colonial history while ignoring or rewriting local history. This psychological control was just as powerful as military force. Australia and North America also experienced the dark side of British expansion. Indigenous populations were pushed off their lands. killed, or forced into reservations. In Australia, Aboriginal children were taken from their families in what is now known as the Stolen Generations. These actions were designed to erase Indigenous identity and replace it with British culture. In North America, Native American tribes lost land, lives, and sovereignty under British colonial policies that continued even after independence. Even within Britain, the empire had consequences. Wealth from colonies made Britain rich, but it also created inequality and dependence on exploitation. The empire shaped British identity, politics, and attitudes toward race and power. The belief in British superiority did not disappear when the empire collapsed, it continued to influence global relationships and social structures. By the 20th century, the British Empire began to decline. World wars weakened Britain economically and militarily, and independence movements grew stronger across colonies. Countries like India, Pakistan, Kenya, and many others fought hard for freedom. Independence, however, did not erase the damage caused by centuries of exploitation. Many former colonies were left with weak economies, artificial borders, and political instability problems that still affect them today. Today, the British Empire is often remembered with nostalgia by some, but history demands honesty. Railways, legal systems, and the English language came at a terrible cost. Millions of lives were lost, cultures were damaged, and entire societies were reshaped without consent. Understanding this dark history is not about hatred or blame, it is about truth. Only by acknowledging the suffering caused by the British Empire can we understand the modern world and the inequalities that still exist. So when we talk about the British Empire, we must look beyond the glorified stories of power and progress. We must remember the people who paid the price. The empire was not just built with ships and soldiers, it was built with stolen land, forced labor, broken cultures, and silenced voices. This is the dark side of the British Empire, a history that deserves to be told honestly, without filters, and without excuses.